Well, for me, there are two different ways of looking at the world. One is to stand in today, looking towards the future. The other is to stand in the future, understand that world well, and then look back at today. The first is not strategic thinking. That will get you incremental results in your organization. However, if you stand in the future and you gaze at it with wonderment and with a new set of eyes and say, wow, what is it that's really going to happen in that era? Then what you can start to do is realize that there are breakthroughs that are possible for you and your organization. Now, my breakthroughs, what I mean, are things like innovations, possibilities, and opportunities that may be new to your organization but may not be new overall. Well, first of all, I think it's important to involve a large group of your members, not just staff and volunteer leaders, in this process. The first thing that I do with organizations is I encourage them to write a series of questions around categories or topics related to the future. So what are the 5 or 7 things they might want to learn about economic trends in the future? What might they want to learn about the social environment or the political environment, or perhaps legislative related issues or political issues? From that, then, what we do is we go out and we start to collect information about those questions minimum of 5 years into the future. Because if you look shorter than that, you're not going to see trends develop. So it's real important to look out 5 years, sometimes 7, 10 years, to be able to see what's going to happen. Then with that information, what I encourage people to do is just to collect it, not to make any interpretations of it, not to synthesize it, but just to let it be so that it can be used later on in a retreat setting. Well, you're absolutely correct. I did not mention those things because we're not talking about the current state of affairs. And if you're planning to have breakthroughs, you really need to break through to a different paradigm. And the only way to do that is to stand in the future and really immerse yourself in it and say, what would it be like to live in this world? And then what are the implications to our organization in the future? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do with it. First of all, I have people share it in very small snippets in presentations. Group size can be as large as 50 to 75 members, again with volunteer leaders and staff members there. And to think about a couple of things. First of all, what is this data telling us about assumptions? What's going to be true 5 to 7 years out into the future? So we can kind of put that down on paper. The second thing we talk about is what sorts of trends do we see? Both trends that seem certain and trends that don't seem as certain. Third, we look for wild cards, those situations that have a high improbability of happening, but if they do, could have a significant impact on your organization. And then finally, we look for risks. And what I mean by risks are things that you want to mitigate that could be both positive and negative for your organization. We look at the probability of them happening, the level of impact they'll have on your organization, and the implications. Now, along with all of that, I'm making the assumption that what we're also starting to note are what are some possible breakthrough ideas so that we can aggregate them going forward with other information. Once you have the pieces that I've just mentioned in place, then what you can do is ask the following question for associations, and that is, in the eyes of our future members, what is it that we need to become? You know, one of the things that organizations of all kinds do that I believe is flawed is they say, what do we need to become? Well, you know what? No one cares what you want to become. What your members care about in associations is what do we need you to become so that we'll stay with you into the future and that you'll continue to provide us value. That's the question that gets answered from a vision perspective. Well, what we've talked about so far is doing an environmental scan and then synthesizing that information together. And for me, that's the most critical skill set that's needed when you're talking about strategic thinking. It's not about tearing apart all the information that we're hearing, but it's about aggregating it together and saying, what sort of meaning does this have to our organization? But another tool that can be extremely helpful is to do scenario planning. Now, I do it a little bit differently than others may. The first thing I do with my clients is I say, let's look out at least 15 years. If we were in 2008 as we are right now, the year 2025 would be an excellent choice. Once we hit 2009, 2010, we're probably going to want to look at the year 2030, maybe even 2035. And then what we do is to create a scenario question, a question that has value or implications to our organization. So you would never ask the question, in the year 2025, what will my association look like? Because that's not really of interest. What I would be looking at is what sorts of demographics do your members hold? And might there be a question relative to those demographics in the year 2025 that would be of value to look at? Or is there something about the geography in which you serve, and maybe that question would be beneficial to look at in the year 2025? So for example, if your organization only serves the greater Chicago area, then perhaps a really interesting scenario question would be, what is the State of the Union going to be for the Chicago metro area in that time? Or even narrowing it further, what is the business community going to look like in the year 2025? Once you have your scenario question, then what you want to do is go back to data that you've collected about the year 2025 and look for trends. What I do with those trends is have all the people who've gathered together vote on which trend they believe is the most uncertain going forward. We often do that through weighted voting. And then we'll take those two uncertainties and we'll anchor them. And what I mean by anchoring is, let's say that one of the uncertainties is the state of the U.S. economy. Well, then one anchor might be economic prosperity. The second anchor would be depressed economy. Okay, so then we've got two anchors for that one variable. We can have two anchors over here for another variable, which then gives us four different worlds that we can look at relative to the question that we talked about early on. And then what I do is break people, if we have a group, let's say of 50 people, break them into 4 groups and have them write stories about what would the world be like if we were to answer that question given the two constraints for your world. With those stories, we then title them, and then we step back and we say, if that really were to happen, and that story were to come true, what sorts of things had to happen historically if you go back from 2025 to 2020 to 2015 to 2010 to 2008 in order for that reality to actually have occurred. What's even cooler yet is when groups hear all 4 of the stories, they can hear similarities and differences, which we note afterwards. But what we're really looking for are additional breakthrough ideas. And even more importantly, what we're looking for are breakthrough ideas that would actually coexist in all 4 of these worlds. Because for me, if strategic thinking is to work well in an uncertain situation, then it means that that breakthrough has to be able to serve more than one reality. So if it can serve all 4 realities, then we really have some breakthrough ideas that we know will take us into the future. It's not. And the reason it's not is because the methodology itself will help people to think strategically. So all they have to come is with a willingness to come with a fresh pair of eyes and the ability to participate with others and to be collaborative. Well, I think that most people think that they don't have time to think strategically because they really need to solve the immediate problems that crises have brought forward. Yet what strategic thinking actually helps you to do is to be flexible and nimble going into the future. And let me give you an example. When I was doing this work with my clients in 1995, we read a book by Harry Dent Jr. called The Great Boom Ahead. And in that book, Harry showed through some modeling that we were to expect an economic recession and in fact a depression between the years 2008 and 2015. And in fact, that is actually now, I think, starting to occur. Many of the things that he mentions are coming to fruition. You know what I keep thinking about? Wouldn't you have liked to have been one of those organizations who knew that information today?